Good morning, everyone. Though it's gray outside, we just want to welcome and to be here on this very beautiful day. For those I have not met, my name is Sandra Frank. And this morning, I am worship assistant with Marisa Albanese for our guest minister, Rabbi Randy Sheinberg. On behalf of the members and ministers of this community, I'm privileged to welcome all of you to the Unitarian Universalist congregation at Shelter Rock and to our service this morning. As a Unitarian Universalist congregation, we gather to worship, to reflect upon matters of ultimate concern in our lives. As people of the Unitarian Universalist tradition, we come together to celebrate the spirit of life that dwells within all of us. We gather in reverence for the mystery of life, to deepen our awareness of who we are and what we hold most dear, and to discern our unique way of serving the needs in our larger world. In the words of Sophia Faz, life becomes religious whenever we make it so, when some new light is seen, when some deeper appreciation is felt, when some larger outlook is gained, when some nobler purpose is formed. We hope that the people of all ages who cross our threshold will feel warmly received and encouraged in their personal spiritual growth. If by chance you're a newcomer or are visiting with us today, know that we are truly happy to see you and happy you are here. After the service, we hope you will introduce yourself to us and take the time to visit our welcome table that's in the lobby. And if you'd like more information about our congregation or Unitarian Universalism, in the pews, complete one of the blue visitor information cards. They're on the ends in the pew rack. Once completed, simply place that card in the offer plate when our collection is taken, or that card may be turned in at the welcome table. And now, before we enter our service, I have a few announcements to share with you. While I do, I invite you to please turn off your phones if you haven't, and any electric devices you may have. Importantly, today, the UU Cafe lunch will not be served, even though it's in the order of service. It's listed in the announcements. The social hall right now is set up. It's being used for practice for our concert, the orchestra. That is going to be a big event on August 5th, and everybody is invited to attend. At 12:30, though, in the social hall, our caring committee will be celebrating everyone with a summer birthday. Cake and fruit will be served at no charge. You're all invited, and you needn't have a birthday to enjoy a piece of cake. And today, our art committee, once a month, we have a new display in the art gallery, and today is one of the openings, so we invite you to please stick around and go into the art gallery at 1 o'clock. For the reception of the new showing. Although I'm not going to read them, there are in your order of service announcements from our religious, education, music, and social justice committees. I encourage you to please review them and our congregation's calendar for the week ahead. If you have any questions about the programs, call our main office. They will open tomorrow morning. On Monday, they'll be open, and just call in. And now it is my pleasure to introduce you to our guest preacher, Rabbi Randy Sheinberg, who is spiritual leader of my other spiritual home, Temple Tikvah in New Hyde Park. Thank you, Rabbi, for being with us today. Friends, before we move into briefly greeting one another, let us pause for a moment to be reminded that the life we share is filled with joys and sorrows and joys. And the people we encounter along the way get to matter a great deal to each of us. Today, we share the sad news of the deaths of two of our longtime members of this congregation. On July 9th, after years of living with cancer, Vicki Spielman died unexpectedly, though peacefully, at her home with her family. On July 10th, Joel Lowy was taken off life support and also died peacefully with his family surrounding him. They had all come in and everyone was with him. Today, in community, we hold Vicki and Joel, their families, their dearest friends, in our hearts and minds. May they feel our support and care. Now, as is our practice, with gratitude for longtime friends and for newcomers alike, you are invited to greet those closest to you, introducing yourselves to those you do not yet know.
we enter into this time with the words of the Reverend Wayne Arneson. We come together today seeking a reality beyond our narrow selves that binds us in compassion, love, and understanding to other human beings and to the interdependent web of all living things. May our hearts and minds be open to the power and the insight that weave together the scattered threads of our experience and help us remember the wholeness of which we are a part. We hallow this time together by kindling the flame of our chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist tradition. I invite you to join now in singing hymn number 318, We Would Be One, which is in your gray hymnal. Please stand as you're comfortable. Please remain standing. I invite you now to join in our words and song of affirmation, which are printed in your order of service. Love is the doctrine of this congregation. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve human need, this do we affirm and covenant with each other. You may be seated.
It's the only thing that there's just a little of. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some, but for everyone. Lord, we don't need another mountain. There are mountains and hillsides enough to climb. There are oceans and rivers enough to cross, enough to last till the end of time. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's just a little of. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some, but for everyone. Lord, we don't need another meadow. There are cornfields and wheat fields enough to grow. There are sunbeams and moonbeams enough to shine. Oh, listen, Lord, if you want to know what the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's just a little of. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some, but for everyone. No, not just for some, oh, but just for everyone.
We eat from fields we have not planted, and we drink from wells we have not dug. Bound to all living beings through the interdependent web of life, we are called to sustain and uphold our strand. Each in our own way, let us mindfully tend to the ever-shifting needs of our world, and may we generously share with others what we have been fortunate to receive. An offering in support of the ministries that serve the people of this congregation and the ministries that extend far beyond the walls of this building will now be given and received. Will the ushers please come forward?
With that delightful melody dancing in our mind, we enter now into a period of contemplation, to hear the yearnings and needs of our own hearts, and to reflect upon the needs of others within our circle of kinship, as well as the larger world. Those who wish to come forward to light candles of sorrow or hope are invited to do so at this time. Though this light is only a flickering flame, our separate lights become one that we may be nourished by its glow. May it give comfort to us all.
Looking at all the beautiful flames that we have lit, it's my privilege to offer up this moment to incorporate those lights into our own healing. I would ask you, if you would, to find a comfortable position in your chair, and if you're able and comfortable doing so, allow your eyes to gently close. Feel yourself lifted, perhaps from the seat, and grow your spine as if facing and reaching up toward the sky. From this position, breathe. Sounds like simple instructions, and it's of course something that we do all the time. But this time I invite you to just notice the breath that is entering your body. Feel it bathe your insides, your lungs, your whole chest cavity, and then gently on your own time, let it go. This breath is what connects us. to one another and to all that lives on this planet that we share. So continue to breathe, and in these moments, see each breath as a healing balm that you take into your own body. Feel it working its magic, soothing you. Let it into the places that feel broken or without hope. And allow it to carry away the negative thoughts and bring in what is positive, what is possible. And you can continue to do that, but if you feel whole, take a moment now and take that same breath and extend it to someone else you know who may be in need of some healing. And just breathe your thoughts in their direction, extending the hope and the prayer that they too can find their healing, that this same breath that unites us can enter them and their broken places and bring them healing as well. May we all be blessed with courage, with strength, and with healing. As you're ready, you can open your eyes. I was invited to bring you a story this morning before my more formal sermon, so we'll share with you this story. I will tell you that I am the daughter of a former first grade teacher, and so I grew up hearing a lot of stories and loving them. I don't think they're just for children. So here's one that I know. This is a story about a queen who lived in a palace and had many fine pieces of jewelry, but had one ruby in particular that she really prized. It was large, it glowed a beautiful shade of red, and it was sparkling everywhere. So she had it set in a necklace that she wore around her neck at all times, and she wore it with pride, and it helped her feel warm inside as she wore the necklace. One day, she was walking through the palace, and the necklace caught on something that was a piece of furniture perhaps, or something that she didn't realize she had brushed against accidentally. And the necklace clattered to the floor. It hit the marble floor, and that beautiful ruby developed a crack right down the center. The queen picked it up and gasped. She felt her heart sink. She loved this stone so much, and there it was with this giant crack right down the middle that could not be missed. So she called for her assistants and said, "Can you help me? I must repair this. What am I going to do? I have really loved this stone and I want it to be repaired." And so her servants took the stone and said, "Your Majesty will go throughout all the land and see what we can do to find the best jeweler and jewelry repair folks who can help to repair your stone." And so they did just that. They took the necklace, they took the ruby, and they went through the realm far and wide. And they found the first expert jeweler who looked at it and said, "This is cracked. There is nothing that you can do to this. Even the finest hand cannot help." But they didn't give up. They kept looking, and they went to the second jeweler who gave them the same information. And they went through the realm back and forth, and finally they looked at each other and said, "What are we going to do? What can we tell the queen? This can't be repaired." And finally, they remembered that just on the outskirts of town, there was one small hut with one gentleman who claimed to repair things. And they thought out of desperation they would bring the necklace to him. And so they went there, and they showed him the ruby with the crack down the center. And he said, I know what to do. Leave it with me for a few hours and come back and reclaim it. They had no choice. They weren't so sure this would work, but they really didn't have other alternatives, so the servants agreed. They left the necklace and the ruby with this gentleman, a fixer, and they went away. And the next morning they came back, and the gentleman said to them, I have fixed the necklace. And they looked, and instead of seeing one crack down the middle, they saw several etchings, not just one crack, but several. And at first they said, oh no, this is terrible, the queen is going to hate this, but then they looked more closely and saw that the one crack down the center had been made into a stem, and from it were etchings of leaves, and from those leaves and that stem was carved the most beautiful rose that they had ever seen. They took the necklace back to the queen, and her face lit up, and she said, ah, this is indeed beautiful, maybe even more beautiful than it was before. It shows me that something beautiful can grow from what's broken.
In the name
So, thank you for that beautiful music. It's lovely. I wanted to also extend a thank you to the entire UU community, to Reverend Jennifer Brower, and especially to Marissa, and of course, especially to Sandra Frank for inviting me here. I'm the rabbi at Temple Tikvah of New Hyde Park, and I do feel like our two communities are kindred in many, many ways, so it's just a delight to be able to be with all of you today. So it's July, and the days are luxuriously long and easygoing. It's a time where many of us take vacations, a time filled with sunshine. It's the brightest, the latest time of the year. That is, unless you happen to be looking at the Jewish calendar. A week from today, that is, starting next Saturday evening, the Jewish calendar turns to the observance of Tisha B'Av. This is the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av, and it's actually the darkest time of the year. On the day of Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, some Jews fast for a full day. They wear simple clothing, as close to rags as possible. Some sit on the floor in the dust, and they read from the book of Lamentations, known as Echa in Hebrew, and they mourn. Tisha B'Av marks the saddest day on the calendar because it is the time to recall destruction. Destruction of the first temple in 586 BCE, before the Common Era, and of its replacement, the second temple, destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 of the Common Era. Each time those temple walls crumbled, the whole Jewish city of Jerusalem was also destroyed, the people subsequently forced into exile from their land. And over time, that date of the 9th of Av has been used to mark and mourn disasters from later periods of time as well. Now I know, chances are, most, or I dare say all of you here today don't observe Tisha B'Av. For non-Jews, the story of the destruction of the temple doesn't have much meaning. And many Jews, especially those of us of the liberal persuasion, like me and my temple community, we don't miss the times when the great temple stood. We don't long for a return to a Jewish faith centered around animal sacrifice, which is what happened when the temple stood. We're not sorry that the Judaism of temple times, which featured a hereditary religious hierarchy only open to men, we're not sorry that's disappeared. And though we feel pride in much of what the modern state of Israel has accomplished, yes, for all its warts and its shortcomings, many of us are quite happy and quite proud to call the United States our home, even with all of its warts and shortcomings as well. But still, this time of year, the verses from Lamentations haunt me. And this year, they feel a little bit more relevant than they have at other times. The book of Lamentation begins, Echa yoshva badad ha'ir. Alas, how lonely sits the city once great with people. She that was great among nations has become like a widow. The princess among states has become a thrall, a slave. For these things do I weep. My eyes flow with tears. I think this year of a young teen whom I met at a social action conference in Washington this past spring. A scuba diving instructor living in Florida. She'd gone to one of her favorite spots in the Florida Sea to visit a familiar and beautiful reef, only to find the coral there bleached white and lifeless. Rising sea temperatures had killed off the life there, and as she told me this story, her eyes welled up. We're destroying our planet. There won't be anything beautiful left, she said. Echa, for these things do I weep. My eyes flow with tears. I think of a teacher I know, new to her job in a school nearby, coming into her classroom one day last fall, being approached by a young African-American student, one of only a handful, His lips were quivering as he pointed to the swastika someone had drawn on the back of his chair the period before. The teacher hugged the crying boy, but we all know hatred and hate crimes have been on the rise these days, and so many do not feel safe. Echa, for these things I weep, my eyes flow with tears. And I think of the children I've heard described by colleagues I know who visited the McAllen, Texas facilities where they're staying, having been wrenched from the arms of their parents at our own border. A room full of toys, but they wail uncontrollably, not understanding why they've been separated from their families or whether they'll see them again. Echa, my eyes flow with tears. Friends, we live in a world of brokenness. Tears are everywhere. Maybe it's what's happening in the world around you that makes you want to cry and weep. Or maybe it isn't the world's problems that have you down. Maybe it's your own personal world and its challenges. Caring for a loved one who is ailing. The end of a relationship. A pink slip. A dream shattered. Or the simple yet constant ticking clock of your own mortality. Echa, our eyes sometimes do flow with tears. There's no getting around it. As the Buddhists say, life is suffering. And one thing I actually appreciate about the Jewish calendar is that it doesn't deny this fact. Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, is the time Jews are invited to wail and to grieve full out, to really feel that sadness, the loss, the hurt that we've inflicted on others and the pain in our own lives. It's not comfortable, to say the least, but I think it's healthy to grieve. We can't and we shouldn't pretend the brokenness away. To quash suffering is soul-numbing. Better to wail full out. Whether you observe Tisha B'Av or not, make time in your own life for grieving. It's an important part of life. But having said that, there's also such a thing as too much grieving. And these days, I sometimes find myself overwhelmed with despair, bent low with the weight of the world's sorrows. How do we handle it? What do we do about the days or the times when we feel like curling up in a ball in our own beds or crawling back under the covers and just wishing it all away? This past week, I traveled with my husband to attend the unveiling of my sister-in-law in Kansas City. It was a poignant time. Gathered with other family members at her graveside, we revisited the stories of her too short life. We shed some fresh tears and we hugged one another. And when we got home back to New York, my husband, Marty, woke early, and almost the first words he said to me were, "It's time to water the garden." We can't always stop the pain or the suffering, and we can't just wipe away the tears. Sometimes a tissue isn't enough, but we can turn to life and we can help something grow. The writers of the Psalms knew this. They write in Psalm 126, Hazorim bedima barina yiksoru. Those who sow in tears will reap in joy. Yes, we sometimes need to cry or to grieve, but even through those tears, we can plant seeds or we can water them. We can trust that they will bring forth life and hope. The day, the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, is a time of mourning. But actually, the story it tells doesn't end in grief. The Jews who lived in the Second Temple time, since the year 70 CE, suffered greatly. Lives were lost, homes were destroyed. They had to abandon their place of worship and their way of life. They could have thrown their hands up in despair and given up on their faith and history, but they didn't. One man in particular, Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was a prominent teacher and rabbi, was determined to preserve Jewish civilization. As legend had it, when Jerusalem was under siege, he arranged to have himself smuggled out of the city in a coffin and delivered to Vespasian, soon to become the Roman emperor. He persuaded the Romans to spare one tiny town of Jewish settlement, the town of Yavna, and to allow him to travel safely there. Together with his disciples, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai created and nurtured a small center for Jewish learning and study. It wasn't a big, beautiful edifice like the temple had been. There was no pomp and no pageantry. It was a tiny school, but it changed everything. From that small seed grew the whole edifice of Jewish law that followed, the Talmud and all the years after that, and it also preserved Jewish life to be the vibrant religion that it is today. There are always seeds to be sown. Sometimes it may be a small action in the direction of the change you want to see. Maybe it's attending a rally, speaking out for a cause you believe in, or writing just one letter to a representative. Or maybe something as small as changing a light bulb or buying and traveling in a hybrid car. It might not feel like much, and you might be tempted to give up on these small steps because they feel futile in a world that feels so broken. Don't. Think of them as tiny seeds and allow yourself to believe that there can be a harvest. Imagine that there will be a joyful harvest sometime down the road. If enough seeds are planted, the landscape can change. We may not see the fruits of that labor, but with every positive action we take, we birth the potential for change in the world and, yes, in ourselves too. And if political activism isn't your thing, there are other ways to plant and sow seeds as well. Years ago, when I was studying in Manhattan, I would volunteer regularly at my school soup kitchen, the one we house in our school's building. I have to tell you that some days I was overwhelmed with what the responsibilities I had, the workload as a student, the academic courses and the papers, and the congregational responsibilities I had as an intern and caring for other people. And it felt overwhelming. And on days like that, I could work myself into a funk. It was tempting to bow out of the volunteer responsibility with the excuse that I just wasn't in the right mood, that I was feeling too sad or too burdened. There were times, I will confess, when I gave in to that dark mood. But there were also times when I didn't. There were times when I indeed went down to our soup kitchen. I shook hands with our guests, those who came to eat. I gave one an extra banana when I knew it was his favorite dessert. I let another tell me a joke even though I had heard it 1,000 times before. And guess what? The more I did this, the more whole I felt. The more my sadness, my burden softened. And the more I could look at the bright light of another human being and feel their love and radiate it back to them. Friends, you don't have to volunteer at a soup kitchen. There are people all around who need love, who need our kindness. And even in our sadness, and perhaps especially when we are feeling sad, that's the time to sow those tiny seeds of compassion, those tiny seeds of kindness. Open your heart and take one tiny action, whether it's turning to the person next to you here, or your own family, or the people you meet on the street as you go along your day. Reach out to someone. Perform one tiny act of kindness, and you will find your sadness lifted in remarkable ways. There's one other thing about the holiday or the observance of the 9th of Av that I want to share with you. And it's a radical idea. There's a tradition that claims that the 9th of Av isn't only the darkest day of the year. It's also the birthday of the Messiah. Now, I know that word Messiah may not ring well to you, and I have to explain it with a footnote for what it means to me as a Reform rabbi. I don't mean to say that the Messiah is one person who will come to bring salvation to the world. That's not my theology. It may be others. But I do think that there is such a thing as a power, a force in the world that can bring hope and salvation. And just think of that. Think of the possibility that out of the deepest darkness can be born that force. Out of the darkness can come the greatest hope, the greatest salvation. Think of the possibility that grief and brokenness can be an incubator for hope. But here's the thing. That power, that salvation, can only come about if we do the planting, if we sow those seeds, if we face despair squarely, and through our tears, if we have the courage to turn towards the possibility of life. Then what can be born is joy and hope and possibility. So friends, in these times of light and darkness, let's rejoice as we can and cry when we need to. But through our tears, let's have faith in the harvest ahead. Let our tears water the soil, and let them bring a bounty of joy and healing as we sow seeds. May it be so. I invite you to please join us in the gray hymnal in hymn 100 as we sing, I've Got Peace Like a River. And as you are comfortable, I invite you to please rise. Please be seated. Spirit of the universe that flows within us and around us, joining us to all of life, help us to bring about a world brimming with hope and love. Even as we are sad, may our brokenness call out to each other. May it draw us closer to one another. May we be inspired by our worship together today to look into one another's eyes with caring and concern. May we plant seeds of kindness wherever we go, and may the harvest we reap together be one of plenty, of joy and song and love and peace to sustain and nourish the whole world. May it be so.